Okay, at this point we have one more attendee. Good afternoon all, and since we have 4 minutes over the official slot time, I propose to start with the training session. Today, of course, I think in about 1.5 hours, we will guide you through what DMARC is, what it's capable of, how it relates to the services we provide to Queensland, and I think regarding the local agencies, what can it mean, and a little bit about the managed service offerings we provide, followed by a demo of the application. To start with, small agenda for today. We have a chat available, so if you have any questions, all the attendees are on mute, since we are with quite a few. If you have a question in between, you can always use the chat. Michiel will try to follow these. We will try to answer most questions at the end of the session, though if there is anything relevant, please mention it, and we will try to at least make it as interactive as possible. And if it's well, I think Michiel, it's up to you. If you think it's useful to answer the question in between, we will cover that. Yes. About what DMARC is, and just to give it some context on how DMARC works in general and how it relates to the scope we work in. Just some background about email in general. The first RFC regarding email was developed in the early 1980s, and I think, well, at least there was one lack in the design, that by default email does not provide any protection against impersonation. Honestly, it almost invites to fake identities. So throughout the years, many security solutions have been implemented, such as SPF and DKIM, which are authentication protocols. These were typically or traditionally more used on the inbound side, and so the traditional way to deal with email security was focused on the inbound part, to filter out spam and malicious messages with viruses. And DMARC enables us with one extra check on top of that regarding the inbound side. Typically, this is covered by ISPs or mailbox providers. And this is not our scope of work. So, of course, it's possible to do an inbound check, though our scope of work is focused on the outbound side, and I will clarify that later on, since DMARC is based on reporting. But just to give some understanding about the check which DMARC provides, it's basically a check which will result in a false or positive, and can be combined with a policy. The check is actually to determine whether a sending source was authorized to send on behalf of the domain owner. Using either SPF or DKIM, this will result in a positive alignment, and we have a separate sheet dedicated to that to clarify that further. But eventually it will result in a positive or negative, a DMARC pass or a DMARC fail. And of course, as a sender or as a domain owner, I must say, you have the possibility to, once you have assured that all your authorized sources are sending DMARC aligned, you have the possibility to enforce policy and instruct receivers, mailbox providers, how to deal with messages that did not pass the DMARC check. This might be at this point a bit vague, so we will try to clarify it later on. As said, DMARC is actually it's kind of a public DMARC record is a public invitation or published in the DNS records of a domain owner, and it instructs receivers out there, or at least it tells that an organization is working with DMARC, and if there's a policy enforced, how to deal with these messages. This was thought in or designed in 2012, mainly in the USA, where big receivers of email sat together, and they needed to, and at least they saw a problem that they were dealing with lots of malicious emails and they at that point found it difficult to actually determine which emails were actually spam and which not. And this was at least caused that they saw that many authorized sources weren't complying to all the email authentication protocols, such as SPF and DKIM. And the thought behind DMARC is that by reporting back to the senders or the domain owners of these messages, the domain owners will have insight in what they are sending, what the authentication status is, and based on that, you have the possibility to improve the authentication status of the messages they're sending. As said, DMARC is a check. The current version rests on two existing authentication protocols, SPF and DKIM. And it is possible, at least looking at your RFC standard, that there will be future protocols added to DMARC. At this point, SPF and DKIM, at least regarding the knowledge level, we expect that there's some knowledge level around SPF and DKIM, both authentication protocols. Where of course SPF works based on an authorization for specific IP addresses or systems which are authorized to send on behalf of a domain. DKIM works cryptographic. Actually, we prefer to work with DKIM. We'll clarify it later as well, which actually has the possibility to sign a message which states that the sender was authorized to send on behalf of that domain. And furthermore, DKIM has the capability to actually digitally sign the message. As mentioned, DMARC record is public. Furthermore, later on, there's a slide regarding adoption. But as mentioned, a DMARC record is published in the DNS, visible to the entire world. And at that point, when a DMARC supporting receiver, this could be Microsoft or Google, receives the message, and they at that point they can look up in the public DNS if the domain owner is working with DMARC. If yes, a similar DMARC tag is published in the DNS. It's in fact optional for ISPs to support DMARC. I said I like to refer to it as a public invitation. In this example, we see the DMARC version 1 is published with an underscore DMARC on your domain name. There should be always a version mentioned in a DMARC record. In this example, it's quarantine, and which instructs, at least, which is the medium policy, and we'll get back to that later. And we see the RUA and the ROOF mail2 email addresses. These refer to the aggregate reports and to forensic reports, which we'll also cover later on thoroughly. And basically, it instructs receivers to report back about the authentication status and the messages they have received on behalf of a domain owner in the DMARC format towards these two email addresses as a destination address. Furthermore, a DMARC record knows a percentage tag, which at least also instructs receivers to apply the policy on only a certain percentage of the total email volume. In this example, it's 100%. Any questions in between? Or? No. Okay. As said, there are two types of reports. And this is all defined in the official DMARC standard. The aggregate reports, as the word says, they contain aggregate data. These are typically spread on a daily basis. Originally, the DMARC standard knows the setting to instruct receivers on how frequently to deliver these messages. reports, the messages with reports. Though in practice, we see that almost all ISPs out there provide them on a daily basis, and therefore we chose not to use that setting. It gives an overview of the email traffic, the sources which were used to send these emails, including the authentication results. And what's what we really like about DMARC, and it's kind of new compared to existing techniques, is that this also works outside of your own email infrastructure. But of course, if you have a gateway in place or use Office 365 or whatsoever, it's possible to see which emails are sent through your own authorized infrastructure. Now, since DMARC works on the domain level, the receivers out there, the mailbox providers, in case they receive messages which were sent by an unauthorized source, potentially phishing emails, these will also be included in the reports. So on one hand, the forensic reports will provide a complete overview in which sources, authorized or not, are sending on your behalf. What we see in DMARC deployment projects is that in many examples, it's especially for larger organizations, quite a journey of discovery, since legacy systems or systems that just everybody forgot about, or vendors, are revealed based on the DMARC data. The aggregate reports don't contain personal identifying information, PII, are widely seen. We see that almost all the DMARC supporting ISPs provide the aggregate reports. Compared to the forensic reports, which do contain PII, and these are actually samples of messages that did not pass the DMARC check. And with samples, I mean an actual copy of the email. According to the specification, they are requested real time. In practice, we sometimes see a delay, but at least they're delivered once ready. They only contain messages that failed the DMARC check, which could be potentially malicious. And they at least contain a copy of the original message, the body, and sometimes, the headers, and sometimes also a copy of the body. And as you can imagine, at least regarding the potentially malicious messages or phishing messages, the forensic reports are really useful since they contain a copy of the body, which can help to support an investigation and reveal phishing sites. On the other hand, since they contain copies of the message, and in case an authentication issue occurs on an authorized source, these messages or these reports can contain sensitive data. Therefore, we see that there are some privacy concerns around the forensic reports, which we also recognize. We see that not all ISPs out there provide these reports. An example, Google, who does provide the aggregate reports, chose not to support the forensic reports. And in our software environment, we at least designed and chose to handle the forensic reports with great care. By default, they are not stored at all. So at the point we receive them, we chose to have a default policy to delete them right after. It's actually a feature, but only when a client has provided us the public part of the PGP key. We use that to encrypt the message and only store the message in an encrypted state without having possession of the private key. This is owned by the customer, and we believe it's the safest solution to only make these messages in an encrypted state available for the clients to decrypt locally. And based on the forensic on the DMARC reports, organizations or domain owners gain insight in the email whereabouts, basically full insights in the email channels. Although not all mailbox providers out there support DMARC, it's growing rapidly. Still, at least in our experience, we see that there's enough coverage to gain full insight. As you can imagine, if you have a source which is active and sends messages to, well, at least a couple of dozens or hundreds of thousands recipients. If at least one or two of the receivers out there, and in practice it's much more, support DMARC, that source will be revealed in the DMARC data. One of the goals, at least, to work with DMARC in a DMARC project is to assure the DMARC alignment of all the authorized sources. Ideally, that percentage or the DMARC alignment will go up to well, almost 100%. In practice, which we'll address later on, there are some issues around forwarding, and an achievement of 99.8 or 99% and 99.9% is more likely. And at that point, since the project will always start with the DMARC non policy, it's not mentioned here, but then at least in the P tag, instead of quarantine, there's a non mentioned. Non is also referred to as reporting, since it's based on reporting only. So at that point, the receivers out there are instructed to report back the data through the aggregate and the forensic report. Though the result of the DMARC check should not or does not affect the delivery of these messages. So even if almost all the messages would fail the DMARC check, the instruction to the mailbox providers or the receivers out there is to deal with these messages as normal. By the time you will reach a DMARC alignment of close to 100% for all the legitimate sources, it is possible to enforce DMARC policy. DMARC knows 3 kinds of policies, and once a policy is enforced, as mentioned, we have the quarantine policy, and this instructs the receivers to deliver the messages that don't pass the DMARC check in the spam folder or the junk folder. DMARC also knows the reject policy, and this instructs the receivers to totally reject the messages that do not pass the DMARC check. I think as mentioned, DMARC also knows the percentage tag. So it is possible, and in a general DMARC project, we always advise to use the percentage tag, even though at some point an organization is sure, or as sure as can be, that all the authorized sources do comply with the DMARC standard or are DMARC aligned. We always recommend to apply the quarantine for a small part of the messages. An example, 5 or 10%, depending on the total volume. If it's a high volume source, a lower percentage is sufficient to actually validate how in practice the policy will be applied, and if it would cause potential false positives or authentication issues whatsoever, which are not expected, but then at least only a small part of the messages are affected by this. From there, typically we kind of increase the pace, and once you are at 100% quarantine policy, the next step is a reject policy, which can also be done based on the percentage tag. In that example, the percentage tag actually instructs the receiver to apply the policy to a certain percentage, and the remaining percentage, so if the tag is put on 10, the remaining is 90. At that point, the 90% remaining will have a policy applied of 1 level lower. So if you have a 10% reject, 90% will be effectively on quarantine. If you have a 10% quarantine policy, 90% will be effectively have a non-policy. DMARC alignment is kind of at least I must admit it personally took me some time to fully get hold of what is actually DMARC alignment. We always also know that based on conversations we have with customers, it's sometimes kind of tricky. It is the core DMARC principle. Once a message is complying to the DMARC standard, and so it is DMARC aligned, it is sent through an authorized source, and the DMARC check actually validates that the sender was authorized to send on behalf of that domain. DMARC alignment can currently, based on the existing DMARC version, achieved based on two authentication protocols, which already existed before DMARC. So DMARC is an extra layer. SPF, and I think it's at least important that a message can be valid according to SPF. Though at this point the SPF result can be a pass. And in order to reach DMARC alignment, the from address, at least mentioned in the message, also refer to. Let me check. This is the 5322 mail from 21. Hey, I have an issue here. Let me explain it a bit further. SPF can be used to authorize the envelope from, and in order to reach DMARC alignment, the envelope from should match the from in the body, and the body is typically visible to the user. And that's the thought behind DMARC, that it's at least important that the address which the user sees in a screen or in his email client was used to authorize the message. The same thought was applied for DKIM, since the D equals signing domain should match the from domain in the message. And therefore, actually, DMARC goes one step further, and since it could be in theory that let's say a malicious message contains a from domain which equals the domain your organization owns, though technically that message could still pass DKIM if the D domain was a different domain. For instance, the server where the mail server rests on, or the domain where the mail server rests on. Yeah, so therefore the 5322 RFC message format from domain should match the 5321 envelope, which is the SMTP protocol. During the demo, we will clarify it further, since it's possible to see this in our tool. And even one step, at least an extra setting, DMARC also knows. And so based on a message, it's possible to validate where at least the SPF and or DKIM results were a pass. One step further is to check whether it matches the 5322 from domain, the visible address which is displayed to the user. At that point, DMARC will result in a pass or a fail, with one extra parameter, which is strict and relaxed alignment. Generally, we work with relaxed alignment. At least this is one step more specific, providing the possibility for an organizational domain to have a good enough match. Is that how I say it properly, Michiel? Let's say with strict alignment, the authorization can be done on a specific domain or subdomain, and it should actually match. And with relaxed alignment, it can fall back to the organizational domain if a subdomain is used.
Yeah, that's correct. I think in your organization, this is something which can certainly apply, because yeah, you have the main domain qld.gov.au, and your agencies all use the separate subdomains for that main domain. So what Dirk mentions with the alignment mode is that typically with a relaxed alignment mode, if you would use the from domain health.qld.gov.au, and you would sign that with the DKIM domain of qld.gov.au. For a relaxed alignment mode, that would still match because the organizational domain is the same in both situations. However, if you would set up a strict mode, that would fail because for strict, it requires an exact match between these two domains. So at that point, the signing domain should also be health.qld.gov.au.
I hope this is clear to everybody. And I said, I must admit, for me, it actually took some time to actually get fully hold of it. If there are any questions, please mention it in the chat, and we will do our best to clarify it further if needed. Yes, looking at too many keyboards. Just looking at the picture one more time. Yeah. As mentioned earlier, there are some issues around at least email authentication and DMARC alignment around automatically forwarded emails. This comes to the fact that once a message was sent by a specific, let's say in this example, an authorized email source, so the default gateway of an organization or just any Office 365 is used, an Office 365 mailbox, mail server. But once the message is delivered at the receiver, in a specific case where the receiver has set up an automatic forwarding instruction, so this differs from a forwarding done by an email client, because at that point the forwarded message will be sent on the domain owner of the person forwarding it. If it's forwarded automatically, the sending domain will remain, and therefore it will be sent by a different mail server. So technically the sender of the message will change. This could be, typically we see this quite a lot with almost abandoned Hotmail accounts, for instance, or at least free provided mailboxes, which people don't use anymore, which they forward towards their new actively used mailbox. Also seen at universities, where students receive one extra email address and they don't want to bother checking that all the time, and they set up an automatically forward. Well, since the sender technically changes, this is quite challenging, since you could say by default, and therefore at least looking at the SPF authentication method, the sender or the server used to send that second message, the forwarded message, is generally not mentioned in your SPF records. And therefore in this situation, DMARC alignment won't survive an automatically forward in case only SPF was used. And perhaps to clarify the sheet before where I explained alignment, I'm not sure whether I mentioned it. In order to reach DMARC alignment, only one of the SPF or DKIM results needs to pass and align with DMARC. Both is possible, though one is enough. I said earlier that we definitely prefer the usage of DKIM. It provides more functionality, but moreover, it has the possibility to survive these forwarding patterns based on DKIM. If the message is unaltered and is forwarded properly, at least according to all the standards, the signed elements within DKIM will remain valid. So this, at least as long as no changes have been made to the DKIM signature, the message body, and the other signed elements, which there could be more, then at least the DMARC alignment can remain. This sounds rather easy or simple. You would expect that once you have set up DKIM properly, and of course there are sometimes issues that not all vendors or mail servers support DKIM. But what we see out there, and unfortunately the numbers are declining a bit, is that not all automatically forwarders are done as they should. sometimes the body message is altered, and at least based on since DMARC is a technical check and DKIM as well, it's not possible to validate. Let's say if the body message, the body part of the message was altered, it's hard to tell whether the number of a bank account was changed from a valid one to a malicious one, or owned by someone with abusive intentions. And then, of course, in this example, it's a good thing that the alignment will break. But what we also see is that minor modifications are made to the body, or sometimes a signature tag is posted stating this message was checked for viruses and seems to be clean. Technically, it's the same. The message body has been altered, DKIM will pass, and therefore DMARC alignment will not be achieved. And this also explains, certainly, or especially when DKIM is set up for all the authorized sources, which we always recommend, that still in practice, and especially on typically B2C mailing lists, or at least lists where the volume is high, but also in B2B or governmental environments, it's almost never impossible to reach 100% DMARC alignment. Though there is, I think, one positive thing on the other hand. What we see, and I said earlier, DMARC is all about a public invitation or a kind instruction to receivers out there how to deal with your messages. What we have seen as well, and especially the Google infrastructure, or at least Google environment, is a bit ahead in this. But under certain conditions, a message could fail the DMARC check, but still, if a receiver has other reasons, since the inbox placement is actually an algorithm, and there are many parameters which are taken into account. If they have other reasons to still trust the message, they can apply. This is a bit confusing, maybe. They can apply a local policy. So let's say in a typical situation where an organization has enforced 100% a full reject policy on a domain, then this could be because of an internal forwarding issue within the infrastructure of a receiver, or it could be because of a failure made in an automatically forwarded forwarding pattern. It could still, and ARC is one of the techniques used for that, but at least basically it's a conclusion of the receiver that because of the entire picture, they have enough reason to trust the message. At that point, they apply a local policy. This is also reported back to us in the DMARC data. And technically, it means that they have another reason, or a reason they have, and it's not always motivated why, to still find that message trustworthy, and to basically deal with the message based on another policy as you instructed. And therefore, we at least see regarding forwarded messages that many of them are actually rescued because of local policies.
So before we continue to the next slide, I'd like to give some answers on questions we received.
Yeah.
So Peter mentioned that based on the alignment mode we handled in the previous slide, that the qld.gov.au domain will never be used to sign with DKIM with. So that's something to know for the agencies. I do hope that the example I used clarified the situation and the options you have with the alignment mode. And in addition, Peter also mentioned that if a forwarding would apply an additional DKIM signature to a message which they are forwarding, the final message would in that case end up with 2 DKIM signatures, and that is indeed true, and that is also possible, and no problem. You can also send a mail with multiple DKIM signatures, so that's something which is possible and no problem. So that's I hope to answer the questions. Back to you, Dirk.
Yeah, thank you. About adoption, and please proceed that quite some customers are asked questions about how many organizations or domain owners and mailbox providers, ISPs, support DMARC. Unfortunately, the trend is growing upwards. On the left hand, and I must admit, currently we are investigating about updated data, since there's not that much data available. Fortunately, DMARC.org provided the chart on the left hand. This is not the entire internet, it's a subset based on the DNS provider. And this shows how many domains use DMARC. And the only parameter to return positive is to have a DMARC record published. And as you can see, many organizations, or at least the contribution is growing, are using DMARC. And this means that they are at least receiving reports. It doesn't mean that they all have a policy enforced. And at least in our perception, we have the feeling that this trend is still moving in the same direction, especially. And I think this is actually a really good example, since many governmental organizations are obliged to comply with email authentication. I think in most of the examples, which is also in the Netherlands or local market, United Kingdom and USA, we see that the government is urging governmental organizations to comply with DMARC. And on the right hand, it's also visible. DMARC is mentioned in the orange line. It's a bit orange, yeah. That's at least what we have seen. That financial organizations and bigger brands tend to adopt DMARC faster compared to other organizations. So in the Alexa Top 100, and this actually goes back to last year, 2017 was July. Yeah, was the last update. Almost 70% of the Alexa Top 100 domains was using DMARC, which is rather high, I think, as a percentage. If we look at a larger data set, for instance, the Alexa Top 10,000, by the same time, the percentage was 18 or 90%, if I'm not mistaken. Though the trend moves in the same direction. So we at least see that domain owners are using the DMARC widely, and the support is or the usage is growing. It's also rather interesting. I think at least I'm quite proud of it. But the .nl top level domain, at least the agency involved to issue these domains is quite keen on security, and they are actually rewarding the registers out there based on DMARC coverage. So basically, the hosting providers will get a kickback of if they have implemented DMARC on their domains. That's one hand. So it is growing, but of course it's important how many organizations are actually sharing the reports. And this is focused at the mailbox providers. What we at least see in the environment is that the larger mailbox providers do support DMARC, and the numbers are growing. It's also visible in our software platform, at least the top 20 providers which share DMARC reports. Then again, I must admit, there are, especially around smaller ISPs, which typically operate locally, the support is growing, but not at a level as we like to see it. Of course, the local market here is quite visible to us. Over here, the support is not that good yet, though at least we know that almost all of the significantly represented mailbox providers are working on it. And it seems to be at least the only technique around reporting about email authentication which is used out there. So at least we expect to that this will grow further. And as mentioned earlier, in practice, of course, we like to receive as many DMARC reports as possible, since it simply provides better insight. Though in practice, we at least see that there's more than enough coverage to provide full insight in an email channel and to reveal all sources which are sending. So it could be, and we have seen some examples. Let's say if a particular source sends on a daily basis with very low volume always to the same destination. It could be a monitoring message or whatsoever. If the receiving source does not support DMARC, they will not provide reports, and as a result of that, this specific source will not be revealed in the DMARC data. Then again, if the source doesn't support outbound reporting, typically they don't support inbound checking as well. So of course, if the source was still authorized and sending DMARC aligned email, no issue would occur. It could of course be that the source does not comply with DMARC, and let's say one day this receiving party ISP will start supporting DMARC. It could be then, and at least what we typically see, that organizations, once they start performing the check inbound, they also, and we encourage organizations to do that, they also start reporting back. Of course, at that point, the source will be revealed in the DMARC data.
So looking at the total number of inboxes globally, the coverage is still over 85%. So we do believe it is very big, of course, in the email authentication landscape.
Yeah. Yeah, just to clarify further, at least, well, lots of many malicious emails are doing lots of damage. And as mentioned earlier, right, we see at least bigger organizations, governmentals, brands are using DMARC to protect themselves. A bit about our project approach for DMARC project. At this point, we are providing managed service, at least on the highest level, and it's also of Queensland. It is possible. At least we have the commercial structure and at least the platform set up to also provide these kinds of managed service on an agency level. To start with, I think it's important to mention that at least we consider DMARC deployment to be a project. This is also, and therefore at least it's not specifically applied to this account, but for basically our license model provides optional services. Eventually a DMARC project, and I'm starting with the end, we recognize 5 stages. It ends in the latest 5th stage, active monitoring, where ultimately all the domains of an organization are on a full reject policy. At that point, we consider the project stage done, though it's still important, of course, to keep monitoring the account. The amount of work at the point involved with DMARC is much less compared to the project stage. And the primary reason, of course, is to keep assuring the DMARC alignment of your authorized sources, to be aware of false positives, or to at least be sure, since a false positive or an authentication issue at that point can result in the loss of legitimate messages. Furthermore, it's really useful and important to be aware of potential attacks on your domain. But it all starts with the first stage, obviously. I'll briefly.
It's good to sorry to interrupt you, to briefly touch all the stages and continue to the demo.
Yeah.
Because there's a storm coming in Queensland, and Peter is concerned to lose people after 5 p.m. So
really? Wow.
Let's try to.
That's an exceptional circumstance. I hope it won't be too bad, guys. Okay, onboarding. I'll speed up the pace a little bit. So we'll try to wrap up in 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, in total, yeah. So, but
okay.
The demo is also important.
Okay. Primary objective of the onboarding is to set up the accounts and domains and publish the DMARC records. Once these are out there in the DNS, the next and easiest stage follows, governance, which is about, I think, the easiest stage. Receiving enough data to actually take decisions. Together, these onboarding governance take about 2 to 4 weeks each, depending on the amount of domains involved and the emails sent within the channel. Of course, it could be that there's a monthly newsletter or whatsoever in place, and of course, then we need 1 month of data to actually have a decent insight. Policy analysis is always done based on the non-policy, and this is about assuring DMARC alignment for all the authorized sources. During that, of course, it's the new revealed or discovered sources should be set up to email DMARC aligned. This can be done to fix the authentication status of these messages or move them and have them relayed through another source. Sometimes we can even stop or shut down specific sources or move them to other domains. At that point, and this is probably the longest stage, we believe that if an organization has taken enough time, since this is all done based on a non-policy, we try always to be careful and choose the delivery of legitimate sources over causing false positives. At that point, you are ready to enforce the policy. As said, we will start with quarantine, use the percentage tag, and move towards reject. We believe if you have done the policy analysis stage thoroughly, enforcing the policy can happen rather fast. Start with a small step and several big ones after that. And ultimately, you end up at 100% reject. Then I think I'll skip a few slides. These are examples of few managed servers. This is typically the approach we recommend to do a project. Through managed servers, we guide customers with meeting iterations, help them with the project plan, provide this kind of dashboards in a PowerPoint presentation, and discuss them during calls and determine the next steps. Then I'm at the demo.
Yes.
It could be perhaps an option. Of course, we can provide a brief demo. We could also reschedule the next of the meeting towards a more appropriate time, or more safe time.
I do believe that there's a vacation up next in Queensland. So perhaps if I don't get any blocking chat messages, I'll continue with the.
Then perhaps these let's provide a quick one. If there's any additional need for a long one, of course we are available to set up a different session.
All right, so let's continue to the application. This is a demonstration of DMARC Analyzer platform. You should all have access to the platform in the Queensland account already. Let's do a quick tour of the application. Currently, we chose to use our platform instead of the general Queensland account to prevent issues with data. So currently, you see the platform here. You see that all the domains you're allowed to see, and you also see the coverage of the DMARC compliance, and how that is divided between DKIM verification and SPF verification. As you see, we're good on the DKIM side and less good on the SPF side. So if we would take a look, we can filter one of the other pages directly, and you can also target any of these specifically here. Let's take a look at the per setting source. This is one of the overviews we provide based on the aggregate reports. And as Dirk mentioned already, the aggregate reports is the kind of reports we receive typically on a daily basis for all the ISPs. And they provide general data about which IP address has sent how many number of emails, and also give some more detail about the authentication status of these messages. So we split these messages in several categories. We have the green ones, which are messages sent from DMARC compatible sources. So we have a source library in our tool, which is managed by us. We detect these sources in your data automatically. Using the information icon, you can also see that we provide some additional information about that source, and you point you to the documentation of, in this case, Amazon, so you can easily set up DMARC compliance for this source. You can click on a source to get some more details. So next level is the host name, or sorry, the host group level. Then you have the IP addresses here, which you can also provide specific information sometimes. Sometimes we see that a certain IP address has a 100% compliance and another IP address has 0%. And if you click once more, you get some details about the results. This can also differ per IP address. You see what the DKIM settings are. So getting back to the question of Peter earlier, this is a message flow which has multiple DKIM signatures. So you can see that the first one is used, the DMARCanalyzer.com domain, and indicated by the green dot, you can see that this message was aligned, or this DKIM signature was aligned. And you also see that Amazon also signs a message with the DKIM signature. And indicated by the gray dot is that this specific signature was not aligned. So in total, we have at least one aligning DKIM signature, which also aligns the message, which makes it DMARC compliant. And we do have one level more, and you can click there to see which of your domains has provided this data. And in this case, this is the message from domain. So this is the domain which the end users saw in the user interface. And you can see that that domain matches with the DKIM domain, which makes the message DMARC compliant. So the next level is about the forwarders, and this is also the level that Dirk has discussed earlier about what we believe is forwarding and which is not. So as you see, we always use DKIM for authenticating sources. This is what gives us the high compliance of the forwarders of 95.9%. So if we would only align the message with SPF and don't sign any with DKIM, this compliance would be 0, because for forwarding, they will always break if you don't set up DKIM. So if we are on a reject policy, so if we would only have the SPF, that would mean we would probably lose about 2,000 messages here. And this is why we always recommend to sign with DKIM. So the next section is the failing messages, and these are the ones we haven't been able to tag or classify. In this case, this is a Chinese IP address, which is probably not us. So we can probably say that this is an abuser attempting to send a message on behalf of DMARCanalyzer.com. So basically the other overviews in the aggregate section, I'll discuss them briefly because they basically show the same data. So the per result overview shows based on the DMARC result. So the green rows indicate the message is DMARC compliant. The blue rows mean that they have some authentication, but they don't align, or they don't align. So in this case, the message has a passing SPF setup. but it doesn't align. So in this case, we have 2 failing DKIM signatures, which doesn't make the message DMARC compliant. And we have a passing SPF here using some domain here. But because of the fact that this domain does not match our domain, this message fails DMARC. And this is what the alignment means. So in this case, there is a passing SPF setup here. So this domain has indicated that Google is allowed to send on behalf of that domain. However, we're using a different domain, so this will, in this case, fail. And you can also see that in this case, there was a local policy applied to the message, in this case by Google, which means that somehow they believed this message was indeed valid, so they override the instructed DMARC policy, and they applied a non-policy to this message. So in this case, the reason for this is that they believe this is a forward message, and therefore they override the result. And you can see some more data here as well. We can toggle this page to only show on based on the host names. And basically this removes the grouping level of the result, and this allows us to see directly at a glance what sources we have and if they are compliant or not. And also, for instance, if a source has some flows which are compliant and some flows which are not, you can directly see that here. You can also, on the detailed statistics page, you can see some specifics on the results. Sometimes this is useful to get some more insight on a specific result. And you can also click on a result to see how the volume develops over time. And this can give some more insight if, for instance, there was a temporary issue somewhere, or if you resolved an issue, you can see it dropping, or it can be very useful. And this overview also shows you the reporting organization. So this means that Google.com has received nearly 7,000 messages on behalf of DMARCanalyzer.com from an Amazon IP address with this result. So this can also sometimes give some more insight on message flows. This is an overview of the aggregate reports. So next one is the forensic reports. Currently we have set up the encryption as we also recommend though. And currently we can only see limited information about these messages. For instance, in this case, this is a trigger we send when an account is created. Somehow this probably is forwarded, and therefore the DMARC fails. We can see the feedback headers, which are sent or added to the message by the ISP. And this gives some more insight, in this case, about the DKIM domain, about the selector used for DKIM, and also about, in this case, the SPF domain here. This gives some more insight of the reason why the ISP has rejected the message. In this case, there are DKIM fields which fills the message as well. So we can also view the mail headers, and this is where the encryption comes in, because we have only stripped out a few headers for us to be able to create the overview, and the rest is only available when you decrypt the message locally with the PGP key. Though normally this gives some more insight of the contents of the message, of course. So the next page is the timeline. This is basically, you can see it as a DNS history. So we can keep track of DNS changes you apply to your domain. For instance, when you change your SPF record or you publish a new DMARC policy, you can see the progress of that in the timeline. And we also alert you when there's an issue with one of these records. So you can set up the DNS monitor here with the alerts and reporting section, and you can get an alert when there's an issue with an SPF record or a DMARC record or a DKIM record here. So this is also recommended to set it up. So the DNS record section gives you some options to do checks on the on domains, and typically we have quite a thorough investigation of these SPF records, or sorry, DNS records, and they give good results of what is an issue or what could be an issue. So next page is the summary, and you can set up a summary here, and at that point you'll receive a daily or weekly report about the current DMARC compliance status of your domains, and this can help you to keep track of the compliance without having to log into the tool every day. Then we have some more sections with for instance, the user management here and the domain groups. However, these are managed by Peter, so I don't believe it's really necessary to discuss these. This gives a high-level overview of the DMARC Analyzer application. I don't know if you currently have any questions about either the application or about the presentation we've provided you so far. If so, please use the chat window.
Do we have any questions? Or? You have it there.
So Peter confirmed that he is the one managing the groups. Okay, what does good look like? That's actually not that easy to answer, because the percentage which is good, so safe basically to move to a reject policy, that's not fixed, because for one organization 80% is good because they have a lot of abuse and a lot of phishing. So at that point they can't get over the 80% because they are just targeted with a lot of bad stuff. So even though they might have all their flows protected and they have all their accounts set up 100% with both DKIM and SPF, if you are targeted with a lot of phishing, that's something which is influencing the DMARC compliance rate. So what does good look like? If you recognize all your sources in the data and you make sure you protect all the sources in your data, then you're safe to go to the next level and to go to a next policy. But in general, you should not focus too much on the total compliance rate. You should more focus on the individual actions, for instance, provided by us in the managed service reports, or by analyzing the data yourself in the tool.
I think generally speaking, the DMARC compliance rate for the authorized sources should be very close to 100%. As you can see here, one is on 99.7. We still consider that good. And of course, the unauthorized sources is something you can't control. It is very good to see if mostly green is good.
That's true. The setup should be that all the sources you recognize here and are authorized in that case, should be close to 100%. Sometimes it's due to specific configuration issues, it may be hard or sometimes impossible to reach 100%. In general, you should.
But I think this will change once the policy is enforced. Of course, you can't control the messages which are sent on your behalf through an unauthorized source. And of course, that's a bad thing in the first place. But I think it's more harmful if there's no DMARC policy enforced. In a situation when there's a 100% reject policy enforced, it's still not a nice thing that there's unauthorized or potentially malicious activity. But at least once the policy is enforced, you instruct the receivers of these messages to reject them. And of course, then, I think that at that point, let's say if there's 10% of the email volume coming from unauthorized sources, this is only the best you can do, at least within the scope of our services. Of course, the forensic reports or the aggregate reports data can be used to reveal the sources and the phishing sites behind that, but this would require a takedown procedure. So of course, close to 100% for the total volume is best, but we can only control the authorized sources. I hope that clarifies enough.
Yeah, and one addition to that is that, for instance, if you would have basically completed the DMARC project and protected all your sources, and at that point you would be at 80%, for instance. You can also see that once you get to the policy enforcement phase and you start actually applying the reject policy, that the compliance rate could also increase because once you have the reject policy in place, you can also sometimes see that the abusers will stop abusing your domain because they see that it's basically useless because you have the reject policy in place, and then at that point it could still cause your compliance to increase.
Yeah, I think it's always the same. If you have secured your home environment or property better than your neighbors, it's very likely that people with abusive intentions will move towards another domain. So that is indeed a pattern we see.
Okay, I don't think currently there are any other questions. If there are, please let us know. Otherwise we're gonna wrap up. We finalized the training here.
I think we almost reached the new time slot to close the meeting. As mentioned earlier, if there's a desire for further explanation or at least or a longer demo of the software, please let us know when we are available. And if there are no further questions at this point, I would like to thank you all for your time and attention today. And I hope the storm impact will be doable and not too bad.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your attention. And as Dirk mentioned earlier, if there's a desire for managed services a project for any of the agencies, please don't hesitate to contact us. As mentioned, we have the commercials in place already. So if there's a desire for that, please let us know. And then I'd like to thank you also for your attention.
Okay, and have a nice evening almost. Yeah.
Oh, there's one final action. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So what should we do when there's a phishing attack on a domain? So
I think it refers to the action we take.
I think the user.
Oh, one. What action do one take? So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Shall I? Yeah, of course. I think it differs. Typically, within the project stage of DMARC, it is possible that phishing attacks are revealed, and of course, it's the best thing. And if we have information, we can provide the customer with information around that attack. In case of managed service, we will also guard the channels in the email channel. And if we reveal an attack, we will make it visible in the reports. And if it really looks bad, of course, we will interact sooner. Within the project, and of course, an organization can do many things to start a takedown procedure or to investigate legal actions. But according to the DMARC project, still the primary objective is to basically continue to assure the DMARC alignment for all the authorized sources and to apply the DMARC policy as soon as possible. At that point, the impact of the phishing attack will be mitigated, since the receivers are instructed not to deliver the messages. Once a policy has been enforced, according to DMARC, you can't do much more than just have the policy there. And of course, the forensic data and the aggregate data can be used to reveal attacks, though it's at least outside the scope of services we provide, but we can provide organizations with the info to start takedown.
So the additional question is to what extent does the dashboard provide you information about a phishing attack? In general,
this is one thing in between. Sorry, then you can continue, Michiel. I think at this point, looking at this account, since the alignment is 99.9%, it's rather easy to reveal malicious sources, since they will have impact on the volume, especially in the start of a DMARC project when there are many authorized sources out there which are not yet DMARC aligned, it can, especially if there are low volume attacks, it can be difficult to reveal them, since it's more like about finding a needle in a haystack. Once the project is further, it becomes easier to reveal them. One of the features on our roadmap, by the way, is to provide further threat intel regarding these sources. This is something we will release in the next month. Please continue.
Yeah. So yeah, what you can see if you, for instance, if you set up the summary, is that you receive a daily message with the summary of the DMARC data, and that you can also use that to see if there's a current drop in compliance. For instance, currently we're looking at the last month. If we would look at 7 days of data, then you have a different percentage here, and yeah, this is something you can use to detect issues, and of course also investigating the sending source data here. For instance, this is 100% now, and for the 7-day period we don't have any failing messages here. So if you would have a phishing attack, they would appear in your data here as well, and this can help you to track down the source of that attack as well. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Perhaps we can unmute him.
Maybe, yeah, sure. Yeah, perhaps you can unmute yourself.
I think it's up to the presenter at this point. Yeah.
So Peter, you're unmuted now. So yeah, if you please.
No response at this point. So. Peter, are you there? Okay. He typed in the chat that he's not sure whether his audio is working. I assume not fully at this point. you can of course use the chat. Please let us know if there's anything further at this point. Otherwise, we will wrap up the meeting. Okay. Thank you very much, all. That was good. Yeah. Well, as said, good luck with the storm coming. Have a nice evening, and we look forward to working further with you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.